Montana Territory, October 1883. The woman collapsed right as the sun dipped behind the pines barefoot, dirt-streaked, and barely breathing at the edge of Elias Whitlow's clearing. He had just finished chopping wood behind his cabin, the day's last light turning the axe blade gold, when he spotted her stumbling out of the tree line like a dying deer. She swayed, one hand pressed to her ribs and then dropped without a sound. Elias did not hesitate. He was halfway to her before his axe hit the ground. "Hey," he said, kneeling beside her. "Hey, can you hear me?" Her face was flushed with fever, strands of red blonde hair stuck to her jaw, mouth dry and cracked. She wore a ripped cotton dress, torn along the hem and bloodied at the shoulder. Her arms were scraped to raw. He slid his arms under her and lifted her gently. She weighed next to nothing. Elias had not carried anyone in years, not since his wife had died. Not since the army called him an undesirable and spit him back out into the hills with a broken leg and a dishonorable discharge. But his body remembered the motion, and his heart, though he did not want to admit it, ached with something old and dangerous. Inside the cabin, he laid her on the cot and lit the fire fast. He worked by instinct, cleaning the wound, dousing the fever, laying a cool rag across her brow. She did not wake. He did not sleep that night. By morning, the fever had broken. She opened her eyes, green, sharp, confused, and flinched from the light. "Where am I?" she whispered. "My place," Elias said. "You wandered here sometime yesterday, passed out just before dark." She looked around the small cabin, stone hearth, pine walls, one table, one cot, and stacks of books. Her hand went to her shoulder, touching the wrapped wound. "You stitched me." "Had to. Bullet grazed you," she winced. "I remember running." "From what?" She hesitated. "Then a man, two of them actually." Elias's jaw clenched. "Names?" She shook her head, did not hear them. "Just knew I had to get away." He nodded once. "You got a name." "Della. Della Esten." Something in him shifted at the sound. It was not just the name, it was how she said it. Strong, even now. "Elias Whitlow," he said. "You are safe here." Her eyes searched his. "Why would you help me?" He paused. "Because you needed it." 2 days passed. She healed slowly, slept most of the time. When she was awake, she asked little questions. "Why are you out here alone?" "Same reason most men come to the edge of nowhere," Elias said. "I got tired of being judged." She nodded like she understood, and maybe she did. There was something haunted in her eyes, something that had seen cruelty up close. On the third morning, she stood up by herself. The cabin was filled with the smell of coffee, and snow was threatening beyond the window. "You should not be on your feet yet," he said, rising from his chair. "I have been through worse," she said, steadying herself against the table. "You said you ran from 2 men. You want to tell me more?" Della looked down at her hands. "They came for me after my husband died, claimed he owed money, took everything, house, mule. I tried to run. They chased me through the woods. I thought I had lost them. Guess not." Elias felt the slow burn of anger in his chest. "You got children?" Her eyes flicked up. 2. "My twins, a boy and a girl. They are 6. I left them with a preacher and his wife in Cold Creek while I tried to find work. I was trying to get them back when those men showed up again. You have not seen them since. It has been almost 2 months." Elias rubbed a hand over his face. "They still in Cold Creek?" She nodded. "I hope so." He crossed the room and pulled his coat from the hook. "I will get them," he said. "No," she said, stepping forward. "You do not even know me." "I know enough. You could be killed." "I have been close before." He paused. "You said their names?" "No, just that they were big, loud, one with a scar across his nose." "Called the other Mick." Elias nodded once. "Rest. I will be back by nightfall." He rode out on his mare, Flint, before the sun climbed over the ridge. Cold Creek was 15 miles northeast, a mining settlement turned halfway civilized. Elias had not set foot there in over a year. Too many eyes. Too many memories. He found the church on the far edge of town. The preacher's wife, a plump, kind-eyed woman named Ruth, answered the door. When Elias explained, her face turned to relief. "The children are here. They are safe." "We worried." Della said she would only be gone a week. She was being hunted, Elias said, but she is safe now. I will take them to her. Ruth hesitated but then called, Alice, Abram, come here. Two small faces peeked around the doorway. The girl had Della's coppery hair. The boy Elias guessed favored their father. You are taking us to Mama? The boy asked. Elias crouched. Yes, she is waiting. They rode back wrapped in his coat, quiet at first, then bold with questions. What is your name, Elias? You have a horse. You are riding her. You got candy, not since last winter. That made them laugh when they reached the cabin. Della was waiting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, her face pale but alight. The moment she saw her children, she dropped to her knees and opened her arms. They ran to her, burying their faces in her neck. Elias stood back, watching the reunion. The sight did something to him, something permanent. Later, after the children were asleep on the cot, Della stepped out onto the porch where Elias was stacking wood in the moonlight. You brought them back to me, she said softly. He straightened, wiping his hands. You needed them. She looked up at him. And you. What do you need, Elias? He looked at her, then really looked. At the firelight in her hair, the hope stitched back into her face, the way her mouth curved when she looked at her children. I think maybe I needed to see you smile, he said, her breath caught. And then she did smile, soft and full, like she had not in years. He felt something settle inside him then, something he had not known was missing. You should come inside, he said quietly. It is getting cold. She nodded, and as she stepped past him, she brushed his hand with hers. Just a touch. It was enough. By late November, the wind had started to carry ice across the ridge, and Elias had built a second cot from spare boards and horsehair stuffing, setting it beneath the back window where the sun touched in the morning. Della thanked him with a quiet, "It'll do," and placed a folded shawl at its foot like it was something finer than it was. The children took to the cabin as though it had been waiting just for them. Abram lined pine cones along the hearth in some private order, and Alice sang to the mule when she thought no one was listening. Elias let them roam, so long as they stayed clear of the axe and the stream bank. He'd never been one for noise, but their voices filled the space with something that calmed more than silence ever had one afternoon. Della stood beside him as he worked the hand plane across a slab of fur he was shaping into a bench. She held a tin bowl of peeled apples, slicing them into thin rounds with a knife he'd sharpened that morning. You always this quiet? She asked, not looking up. I talk when there's something worth saying. She set a slice in her mouth, chewed thoughtfully. That's so, he paused the plane. You prefer talk for talk's sake? I grew up in a house full of sisters. Quiet meant trouble, he glanced sideways. You the eldest? Second, first died during the fever year. After that, I was the one Mama leaned on. He nodded and returned to the bench. You were married long? She asked after a beat. 5 years. She passed the spring after the war ended. Della didn't ask how. She just worked the knife through another apple. They didn't speak again until dusk when Abram ran in with a reddened cheek and a handful of acorns. There's a man coming up the ridge, he said breathless. Elias dropped the plane and stepped outside. The figure was still a ways off, but the rider's hat was wrong for a ranch hand, and the way he leaned into his saddle said he wasn't looking for trade. Elias turned back. Take the children inside. Bar the door. Della didn't ask questions. She herded them in without a word. The rider slowed as he spotted Elias standing square-footed in the yard, hands loose at his sides, coat open to show he carried a colt at his hip. When the man reined in, his horse frothed at the bit. Looking for a woman, he said, voice hoarse from wind or whiskey. Red hair, runs with 2 brats. Elias didn't flinch. Ain't seen anyone like that. The rider's eyes narrowed. You sure? Plenty sure, the man spat. She's nothing but a lying thief. Took something that wasn't hers. Then I guess she's gone, Elias said, stepping forward. The rider studied him, then the cabin, and finally turned his horse. If you see her, tell her Mick's still looking. Elias watched until he disappeared over the ridge, then went inside. Della stood behind the door, one hand on Alice's shoulder. Just one, he said, but he'll be back. She nodded slowly. I can go, no, Elias said. That's not how I was raised. She met his eyes and didn't look away. You won't scare him off alone. I don't plan to. I plan to end it. That night, after the children were asleep, Elias poured water into the basin by the fire and handed Della a cloth. I saw your hands, he said. From the apples. She looked down at the nicks on her knuckles. Didn't think you noticed. I notice most things. She dipped the cloth and wrung it out. You always watching me, he didn't answer. She pressed the cloth to her fingers, wincing a little. I don't know what I'm supposed to do anymore, she said quietly. I had a plan, get work, bring them home, start over, and now… You're doing it, he said. Della blinked. Doing what? Starting over, just looks different than you thought. She laughed under her breath. You think I belong here. I think you make this place feel lived in. She turned toward the fire, her hair catching the light. Do you want us to stay? She asked, her voice barely above the crackle of the logs. He stepped beside her. I already made the bench for your porch. Della looked up, and for the first time in weeks her face was unguarded. I haven't had a man keep his word in a long time, she said. I'm not most men. I'm starting to see that. When she reached out, she didn't touch his hand. She touched his chest, just over the place his heart beat steady and sure. He covered her fingers with his. Neither of them spoke. There was warmth enough in the quiet. Wind clawed at the cabin walls all night, but Elias stayed near the fire, polishing the rifle he hadn't touched in years. He worked the cloth slow, each pass steady, like quiet could hold off what waited beyond the ridge. He didn't sleep. Neither did Della. She sat on the floor beside the cot where her children slept, knees drawn up beneath her, her eyes fixed on the door. By morning, the wind had dropped. Snow had not yet come, but the clouds hung thick and low, the kind of sky that made a man feel watched. Abram's got a cough, Della said as she poured water from the kettle into a tin cup. Started sometime before dawn. He's warm, a little, not bad yet. Elias reached for his coat. I'll check the trapline, bring back something fresh. Della wrapped the shawl tighter around her shoulders. You sure one of them won't be waiting out there? He met her eyes. They wouldn't come in the dark. If they're smart, they'll wait for the next clear day. She stepped into his path. If you're not back by midday, I'm coming after you. He studied her then. Not the fear he knew that, but the grit behind it. If I'm not back by then, you'll need to take the children and head south. Cut across the flats, follow the creek. She didn't argue, and that told him more than any words. The forest was still. Snow hadn't fallen, but the frost clung to the lowest branches like breath held too long. Elias followed the path he knew by muscle, each trap checked with practiced care. 2 were sprung, 1 empty, the other holding a hare that had frozen stiff in the night. He gutted it quick and clean, wrapped it in cloth, and turned back toward home. He was halfway down the slope when he caught the glint metal, low to the ground. He froze, dropped into a crouch, and eased forward beneath the cover of a pine bent low with frost, bootprints. 3 sets. 1 fresh. He waited, listening. A twig snapped to the south. He didn't move, then a voice soft and close. He went this way, tracks are light. Could be he doubled back. Elias backed out the way he came, silent as drift. He took the long way home, following the narrow ravine that ran behind the ridge. He didn't stop until he reached the rear of the cabin, the smoke from his own chimney curling faint into the gray morning. Inside, Della was kneeling beside the cot, pressing a damp cloth to Abram's forehead. Alice sat beside her brother, one hand wrapped around his. He's warmer, Della said without turning. I saw 3 of them, Elias said. One's got a rifle. She stood slowly. How far off? Too close. What do? We wait. Della frowned. For what? For them to make their move. She crossed to the window and pulled back the edge of the curtain. I don't have much left to lose. You have everything to lose, Elias said. She turned to him, something raw in her face. You don't understand what it's like, Elias. To run so long you forget what it feels like to stop. I know what it's like to stop and not be sure you're allowed to stay. Her mouth parted, but no words came. He moved closer. I'm staying, no matter what comes. That night they didn't light the hearth. The children lay bundled on the cot beneath every blanket they owned. Elias sat by the door, rifle across his knees. Della sat beside him, her hand curled around the hunting knife he'd given her without a word. Hours passed slow. Sometime after midnight, a faint crunch of snow reached his ears. Elias rose without sound and leaned toward the window slit he'd carved years ago. A figure approached from the north. Another flanked from the trees. The third hung back by the ridge. He looked at Della. "It's time." She didn't flinch. "Tell me where you want me." He nodded toward the back corner. "If they breach, you cover the children, I'll draw them." She took her place without hesitation. The front door creaked once, then stilled. Elias waited, breath low. Then wood shattered, a boot kicked through, and the man with the scar lunged inside, rifle raised. Elias fired once. The man dropped before he hit the floor. A second burst through the side, but Della was faster. Her knife sank deep beneath his ribs. He gasped, staggered, and fell. Outside, the third man fled. Elias didn't chase him. When silence settled, it was thick and final. Della stood over the second man's body, her breath ragged. Her hand shook, but her grip on the knife didn't loosen. Elias stepped toward her. "It's over." She looked up, eyes wide, then closed them slowly. When she opened them again, she whispered, "I don't feel afraid." He reached for her hand. "You're not alone anymore." She leaned into him, her forehead against his shoulder. Morning brought sun through the clouds, weak but gold. Elias buried the dead in a clearing west of the ridge. Della sat beside Abram, spooning broth into his mouth, her voice low and steady. Later, when the children were napping, Elias found her out back, hanging blankets along the line. "You thinking of leaving?" he asked. She didn't look up. "I'm thinking of planting potatoes come spring. This ground's rich enough if we dig deep." He stepped beside her, watching the steam rise from the cloth. "That mean you're staying?" She reached for the next blanket, her fingers brushing his. "It means I'm building something here," his voice caught. "With me?" She turned then, her face clear in the sun. "Yes, Elias, with you." He took her hand and she let him. The wind had quieted. The ridge cast long shadows across the snow, and for the first time in years, the cabin felt like home. By mid-December, the snow had come in earnest, heavy drifts pushing up against the cabin walls, burying the fence posts Elias had set in the spring. The world narrowed to the ground beneath their boots and the wide silence above. On good days, the sun broke through and turned the treetops to white fire. On bad ones, the wind howled like it wanted in. Elias had cleared a path to the well early and now stood by the stove, warming his hands as Della measured cornmeal into a basin. She moved slowly, careful not to rattle the tin scoop. Abram had fallen asleep again, curled beneath a quilt with Alice tucked beside him like a bird in a nest. Elias watched her work. "You ever learned to cook on a wood stove before?" She didn't pause. "Had to. My mother didn't believe in waste, and fire was cheaper than coal. You miss her, most days." She wiped her hands on her apron. "She died the year the rail came through, said it split her land like a wound." Elias nodded. "We had one run past my uncle's farm down near Abilene. Used to stand on the rise and watch the smoke vanish into the grass." Della leaned her hip against the table, watching the cornmeal thicken. "Funny how something built to carry people can make a place feel more empty. That why you stayed out here instead of heading east?" "I tried the cities once," she said. "Too many eyes. Too many men who wanted something for nothing. You want to be left alone." She looked at him then, long and quiet. "I wanted someone to see me without taking." Elias didn't look away. "I don't take from anyone who's already given too much." She turned back to the pot, but her shoulders had softened. Later, while the children napped and the stew simmered, Elias brought in a narrow cedar plank he'd carved smooth and laid it on the table. He took his knife from his belt and began etching letters into its surface. Della walked past and paused. "What's that for?" "Cabin's got no name, thought maybe it should." Her brow creased. "You naming it after someone, after something," he said. "Two things, really." She came closer, watching his hand move. The letters grew clear, Sundown hollow. She smiled, slow and thoughtful. "That what you call this place?" "No. That's what I call the moment everything changed." She didn't answer, but she reached out and touched the edge of the wood, tracing the grooves with her fingertip. Her breath caught just once. The wind picked up again as the sun fell, and Elias stepped outside to bring in the last of the kindling. The air bit through his coat, but the sky behind the trees burned orange and violet, and the pine tops swayed like they were bowing to something holy. He heard the door open behind him, soft on its hinges. Della stepped out, pulling her shawl tighter. "You always stand still like that?" "Only when I've got something worth looking at." She followed his gaze. "You think we'll make it through the winter?" He nodded. "We've got food, we've got wood. And we've got each other." She was quiet a long moment, then said, "You ever think about starting again proper, not just surviving, I mean?" "I do now." She turned to him, the fading light catching the edge of her hair. "I never thought I'd want that again, after what happened. After what I let happen. But I see the way you watch them, the way you carry things without saying much, makes me think maybe I don't have to be strong every minute." He stepped closer. "You don't, not anymore." She looked up at him then, something soft and certain in her eyes. "Then I won't pretend anymore." Elias reached out and brushed her cheek with the back of his hand, slow and careful, like she might vanish if he moved too fast. She leaned into the touch. "You're not the only one who lost things," he said. "But this feels like something I want to keep." The cold rose around them, but neither stepped back. The cabin glowed behind them, smoke curling from the chimney, the stew's scent drifting warm through the air. Inside, the children stirred but didn't wake. Della took his hand in both of hers, held it against her chest, and nodded once. He understood. No more running. No more hiding. The ridge stood quiet behind them, and the night settled soft as if the land itself had finally exhaled. The thaw came slow that year, waiting until mid-March to lift its weight from the land. When it did, it came in murmurs, drips off the eaves, the first green tips along the creek, the soft groan of ice breaking beneath the surface. Elias stood at the edge of the clearing one morning, listening as the ridge let out its breath, the stillness giving way to birdsong and the rustle of the world returning. Behind him, the cabin had grown into something more than shelter. He'd added a second window by the back wall to bring in the light, and built shelves for the children's books Della had traded for with the last of her silver combs. On good days, she read aloud while Elias worked near the door, carving handles or mending gear, the sound of her voice curling in the air like the scent of baking bread. She stepped out onto the porch now, brushing her hands on her apron. "Ground soft enough to plant." Elias shaded his eyes with one hand. "We'll need to clear the lower patch first, that soil's better." She leaned her shoulder against the post. "You still planning to put in that second pen?" "I am. With the mule and the goats, it's tight back there." She touched the edge of the railing, then glanced over her shoulder toward the open door. "They're still asleep." Alice was up coughing. Elias turned to face her fully. "You worried?" "No," she said, though her voice caught. "Just watching them breathe sometimes is enough." He nodded once, then looked out over the slope. "I've been thinking of building something else." She stepped down into the grass, bare feet damp with melt. "What sort of something?" He hesitated, then said, "A room, off the back, for the children. So they've got space of their own." Della tilted her head. "That's not just a room, that's a promise." "I know." She crossed the yard, her hands folded under her arms against the chill. "I didn't expect this," she said. "Not really. I thought we'd survive the winter, then drift apart like snowmelt into the river." "I couldn't drift from you, Della." Her breath hitched, but she smiled. "I've been carrying so much, Elias, guilt mostly, for the things I let happen. For the things I couldn't stop. You never had someone to share that weight with?" "I do now." They stood close, the air between them warm despite the frost still clinging to the shade. She reached out and rested her palm flat over his chest, feeling the steady thrum beneath his flannel shirt. "Do you think," she said, eyes searching his, "we could make this official?" Elias's gaze didn't move from hers. "I'd marry you right here in the field if the preacher'd brave the mud." She laughed, raw and bright. "I think Ruth would come. She always liked to meddle." "I'd have to find a ring." "You already gave me something better." He frowned slightly. "What's that?" "A home," she said. "And your name, if you'll give it," he swallowed. "You sure?" Della nodded. "I've never been more." 2 weeks later, Ruth arrived in a wagon pulled by a stubborn gray gelding, her husband beside her with a Bible and a flask of cider. The children wore clothes Della had sewn from spare muslin and wool scraps, and Elias stood tall in his only coat, brushed clean and smelling faintly of smoke. They married in the clearing, with the ridge behind them and the sky open above. Alice scattered dried petals from an old pouch Ruth had brought, and Abram stood beside Elias like a solemn guard, his hair slicked and his boots too big when the preacher said, "You may speak your vow." Elias took both of Della's hands and said, "I'll keep you warm and I'll keep you safe. I'll carry what's too heavy and I'll never walk ahead or behind, only beside." Della's eyes brimmed, but her voice was steady. "I will hold your silence like it's something holy. I'll make this place a haven, and I'll love you through every season the land gives us." The preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Ruth cheered loud enough to startle the mule. That night, after the children had fallen asleep beneath quilts Della had stitched with their names, Elias and Della sat on the porch, watching the stars rise sharp and bold above the trees. "You think they'll remember this?" she asked. "They'll remember feeling safe," Elias said. "That's what matters." She leaned into his side, her head resting just beneath his shoulder. "You ever think about having more?" He glanced down at her. I think about a lot of things now, things I never let myself want before." He wrapped an arm around her, holding her close. "We got time." The wind carried the scent of pine and damp earth. Somewhere far off, a coyote called once and fell quiet. The cabin glowed behind them, and the land stretched wide and still, finally settled. They had nothing left to outrun, they had all they needed, and they had each other. "Always,"